Today, I am Olympus visionary photographer Jay Kinghorn, and I'm joined today by fellow Olympus visionary photographer David Wells. David, glad to be here with you.
I'm looking forward to doing this hangout with you, Jay.
Yeah, what we wanted to cover today was a lot of photographers, including the two of us, have made this transition from shooting exclusively with stills to shooting stills and video, and kind of adapting our creative and technical approaches and workflow to a hybrid model where we're choosing the tool at hand. So to start off, how long ago did you make the transition to video, and what was it like?
I started doing video maybe 2 years ago when the DSLRs, the pen cameras in particular, really were able to make the transition between stills and videos pretty much flawlessly. The big thing actually that made it easy for me was in the pen cameras they have that 16:9 ratio option. So I started doing animations and stills where I'd be shooting everything still or time-lapse animation 16:9, and then it was actually quite organic to transition into video. And so the visual part of it was actually not as much trouble as I feared it was going to be when I started. And you?
About the same. It was with the original pen camera, and just developing a comfort before that shooting stills, shooting time-lapse, and making some kind of simple stop frame animations. And what I enjoyed was that it was another way of telling the story. And I feel like with multimedia you have all of these different layers. You've got the sound, you've got music, you've got the sequencing and pacing of images as well as the image themselves for telling a story. And it's kind of like being able to tell a poem using the best words from a number of different languages.
Agreed, and the trick has been to figure out which part of the story is best told with video, which part of the story is still fundamentally a still. And for me, the hardest part is starting to figure out which part is primarily a sound-related component of the story as versus a visual or moving image.
Yeah, and that's certainly the creative part, I think, for me has been harder than the technical challenges, because the workflow, sure, learning a new set of applications is challenging, and learning how to use new gear is challenging, but really thinking through the process and understanding the process takes a lot more time and a lot of practice and patience.
Oh, it's taken a lot of patience and practice. I've been running the blog, The Wells Point, for almost 4 years. And about 2 years ago, I started doing very simple podcasts, some of which are nothing more than narrative slideshows, and then animated slideshows, and then mixing animations and video. And for the last year or so, I've been doing real live multimedia pieces. And it's been both a great way to generate content for the site, a great way to teach lessons to people who come to the site, and of course a great way to learn the skills that I need to learn anyway.
Yeah, there's nothing like practice and repetition to really get it ingrained, so it's solid.
Yeah. Indeed.
So what are you shooting with today? What's in your multimedia kit?
I've got 2 OMDs, the EM5. Probably the thing that I'm the most excited about, and I'll put up a little later a link to the video that I did promoting a hotel and restaurant in Italy that I just finished that in late June. But the most exciting thing for me in shooting that was using prime lenses. A 45 1.8?
Yep.
Which becomes a 90 after the conversion factor, 12 millimeter, which becomes a 24 f2, and then I was using a Panasonic 40 millimeter or 20 millimeter, which becomes a 40 millimeter. So basically, I had a wide normal telephoto, and everything I did throughout that video, pretty much, was done at maximum aperture to control the focus and to control your experience of the food or the countryside or the people in Italy. And what have you been using?
I've been using actually almost the exact same setup. It was funny. I taught a workshop in Doha, Qatar, in the Middle East in January, and I took the EP3 at the time and the EPL3. So I had the 2 pen cameras, those 2 lenses, and then had brought a couple of other 4/3 lenses with the adapter. And pretty much after the first day, I left those other 4/3 lenses in the bag, and we're just shooting with the one camera had the 12 millimeter f2, and the other one had the 45 1.8, and I had one over each shoulder, and that was what I shot with for the whole 2 weeks. And I was so pleased with the results that I got, and enjoyed the process of shooting with those fixed primes to the degree that that's almost exclusively what I shoot with today.
Yeah, I don't want to keep the Mutual Admiration Society going, but that's basically the same thing I shot in Italy as well. The only other thing which I would add, and I was surprised, it started out as an experiment, but it turned out to be a big part of the video, was I was using the 12 to 50 zoom, and I did a number of the electronic zooms, which I've never been able to do as smoothly as you can with the electronic zoom, and it was great for establishing shots and wide shots to just say, this is a village, and then here's the whole valley. And you could just never do that without a electronic zoom. And so that's the only other lens that's in my bag as well, besides basically the three fixed focus prime lenses that you described.
Yep. Yeah. Isn't it nice to have a camera bag that weighs 2.5 pounds, 3 pounds?
Yeah, it really is. And the same thing happened, I'm embarrassed to say, with my old regular 4/3 lenses, which I had the adapter and I dragged them around for a while, and I noticed they never actually got put on the camera, so they don't actually go with me as much. No, it's pretty much all the 4/3 lenses, and then just, of course, carrying duplicates in terms of backup and having more than one just in case. Because I don't want to get all the way around the world to Italy, or I'm going to India in 2 weeks, and the same thing, I don't want to have the chance of something going wrong. So I'm carrying a little bit more in terms of backup than I probably need, but I just like to have my bases covered.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So where do you look for inspiration for exploring this medium?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, I look at a lot of stuff online, and I go back and forth between the tug of war of trying to sort of replicate what other people are doing, and at the same time saying to myself, well, what is it that I do that somebody else doesn't necessarily do? Because unfortunately, we're both in a professional market. I mean, we do this for money, and so we are anointed by people who pay us because we do something else that they can't do. So sometimes I'm looking at other people's work, but again, this piece in Italy, I was trying really hard to use the play of light and shadow and twilight and motion and all the stuff I would do anyway in the piece I made. I will say that I look at a lot of other people's stuff in terms of understanding the video and especially the sound-based storytelling, which is the hardest part that I don't have. I feel comfortable composing the visuals, but not quite as comfortable yet with the other side. What about you?
Yeah, kind of the same as looking at stuff online. Vimeo is a great resource to look at something like the staff picks, and what is being done today is just incredible. And just like you said, trying to figure out what is, looking at something to deconstruct it and figure out how they're telling the story without being, without mimicking what they've done, because you do want to bring your own creative element to it. And I've also learned a lot by watching lots of movies lately and seeing the way that a given director will set up the shots. They'll sequence and pace the scenes as well as use dialogue or use sound to tell the story. That's been really helpful in seeing how kind of the masters do it and then figuring out how we could deconstruct it to a 2-minute or 3-minute piece.
Again, same thing. That's one of the things that has been interesting in the last year or so is looking at movies much more critically. Do you remember Tree of Life?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that movie it's really about the sound because they don't have a whole lot of dialogue. I mean, for the first half an hour, especially the sort of touchy-feely stuff, I wasn't 100% convinced. But once I got into it, especially at the end, I was realizing how sound was being used in a really very different way than I had ever conceptualized. And I think the second half and the sound in the second half is really pretty spectacular. Yeah.
Yeah, I also really liked in that movie how it was shot with primarily wide-angle lenses and very close.
Yes.
And it gave this nice sense of intimacy, particularly when the kids were playing together or they're rolling around in the grass. It really, to me, it really put me right there, and I felt very close to the characters because of that. And those little
I think that's what,
go ahead.
Sorry? No, I think that's one of the things that we do as photographers is that who are used to doing publication work and documentary work we're used to putting people in the middle of an experience, and so that's one of the things that I've been trying to do to transfer from my still images to my video work is to have that same kind of feeling of intimacy.
And to the OMD, that image stabilization that's built into it helps that because you're not feeling like you're confined to a tripod or having to always be locked down on a Red Rock shoulder rig. You can move a lot more fluidly with the camera and get in close and keep moving with it. And I've had good success with the continuous autofocus, the tracking, that if it's a good solid tracking point like a face, that it will keep on top of that even if it's moving forward or back or in and out of the center of the frame.
I haven't played with that. I have to say I've played with the 5-axis internal stabilization. And going to Italy to do this project was very much around the idea of seeing was it as good as they said it was. And I had a tripod and I had a lot of other plan Bs, but I'm happy, actually to say embarrassed, I'm happy to say that I did a lot of stuff, most of it handheld. The other thing, I use a tabletop tripod a lot, so I was very inclined when I was close to somebody in one of those sort of not intimate but close situations, I'd put on the tabletop tripod, I'd pull out the folding screen, and I'd run it for 10 or 15 seconds, and then I'd move to another venue and another venue. And at the end of it, I've got 4 or 5 short clips that add up to the whole scene. And either because of the internal stabilization or the tabletop tripod, they're very, very consistent.
Cool. And I'm curious what's your creative process when you're shooting something like that? Because you're shooting on your own, it's not something that's storyboarded and heavily scripted. How are you pacing together story and angles and how much B-roll to have and what camera angles and what's going to cut together well?
This is about the 5th one of these. This is the longest one that I've ever done. And I'm starting to it's funny, you're asking me to articulate something I only half understand. But the last one I did in India about a year ago, maybe more, a year and a half ago, and then this one was basically the same thing, which is probably shooting too much stuff, to be honest, but knowing that if I get enough angles, high, low, left, right, close, far, I can use it, and then looking at the stuff every night and saying, what are you thinking about, what's jumping out at you, what are the themes, because my stuff is not scripted, which I know is people go both ways on, but it's not. And in Italy, I got about halfway through, and I started understanding what I wanted to do, and so the second half was actually very easy. Maybe the answer to your question is the first half is really hard because it's still kind of churning, and then once I kind of settle on it, it's really pretty easy to do the second half. What about you?
For me, I tend to, if I'm doing something that's around a person or a story, I'll try and do the interview first, and that will usually give me clues as to what types of things I'm going to need to have, what coverage I'm going to need to have. But some of it is sort of fly by the seat of your pants. I did a project, kind of embarrassingly, it was a personal project last summer, end of last summer, I guess it was late August, early September, that I've had to just kind of shelve because I've been so busy since then. But I'm still thinking about how I'm going to cover it because it was a race, it was a pretty linear event, and it was very difficult to get good coverage of. And I have primarily still images from, and so I'm still trying to figure out how to put all that together in a way that I'm going to be happy with.
That's a good question. The idea of doing the interviews up front more formally probably is also a good idea in terms of getting a sense of what the bullet points are. The only other thing I would think about in a case like that is then I want to make sure that I'm not letting them drive it too much because they may interview one thing, but I might see something else in the field, and so I kind of have that balancing act. One of the things I was curious about, and I would guess people who are either watching live or watching later would like to know about, is I've been thinking a lot about the idea of what I do bring to it and what isn't new to me. And I'm curious if you've thought about that at all in terms of the photography driving to video versus a lot of video that I've seen tends to be very content-driven. I don't think it's as well put together formally. And so I'm curious how you're thinking on that.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't know that I have the right answer yet, or the answer that I'm happy with for me. But I've been doing a lot of work in After Effects and with motion graphics, and I feel like there's a combination where you can use the power of the still image, the underlying soundtrack to drive the narrative, almost like an audio slideshow, but then some other element, and I don't know that I have the answer to what that piece is for me yet, but it's going to require some more experiments.
That's a good question. Yeah, I guess my starting point was thinking that, like on the Italy piece, I wanted it to be very visually driven. So some of the things like sunflowers and waterfalls and stuff like that, I feel comfortable playing to my strength as a photographer, as somebody who's used to framing an image. But it's some of the other stuff that I'm a little less clear on. And I guess my concern, not concern's too strong a word, but my thought is that a lot of the vocabulary and the sort of grammar of a lot of multimedia tends to start with television. And I'm not 100% convinced that's maybe the best framework that we could use aesthetically, which is why, for example, Tree of Life and many of, when I'm looking at a lot of movies now, I'm looking at them and saying, there's somebody who's got a different visual grammar than television. I like that better. I like this better. And so I'm hoping to try to incorporate some of that, not that I even fully understand it, by the way.
Yeah, I think you're totally right that broadcast TV is great for its own medium, but what we're doing is very different than broadcast, and that eye level, lockdown, static is not the best approach for what we want to do. But taking a documentary photography aesthetic and getting in close and moving around and really immersing somebody in it, I think has a lot of rich potential. And there are a couple photographers that I've seen that are doing really great things, and I'll send you some links to check out.
Be curious. Yeah, that'd be great. That would be great. Good.
So thanks, David. This is a great conversation. I always enjoy talking to other artists and other photographers who are thinking about the same things I am.
Some of the same things. It was interesting. We overlapped in some places and we diverged, which is half of the fun of the creative process. So.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to doing it again soon.
All right. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.